Four Princesses, One Lie. When Love Crosses the Line. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new stories. It is quick, free, and truly the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic and emotional tales. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you so much. Now, let us return to our main character. It was a quiet Sunday evening in Seattle. Inside the Whitmore house, the smell of roasted chicken filled the air, mingling with the faint sound of the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. The Whitmores were everything the neighborhood admired. A retired Army colonel, his graceful wife, and four beautiful daughters everyone called the Whitmore Princesses. Colonel Robert Whitmore sat at the head of the table, his silver hair trimmed short, posture straight as if he were still in uniform. "Family," he said, raising his glass of water, "is built on pride and discipline. Remember that." His voice carried both warmth and warning. Around him sat Diana, the eldest, a nurse whose smile hid a lonely marriage. Next was Sophie, the soldier, her uniform pressed to perfection, her emotions locked behind it. Then came Mia, the social butterfly who used laughter to cover the cracks in her life. Finally, Lila, the youngest, a quiet dreamer whose heart beat for art, not law school like her father wished. For a moment, everything looked perfect, silverware shining, the candlelight soft, but the air was heavy, like everyone was holding their breath. "To the Whitmores," Robert said. "To the Whitmores," they echoed, all smiling except their eyes. On the living room wall hung a framed, quote, "Family above all." It had been there for as long as they could remember, a silent command. Whenever someone passed by it, they paused, sometimes out of respect, sometimes out of guilt. Diana looked at it as she carried dishes to the sink, thinking of the husband who no longer came home. Sophie glanced at it, wondering if her father would ever understand the man she loved. Mia avoided it altogether, afraid it could see through her debt and her lies. And Lila, standing near the window, whispered to herself, "Family above all. But when does that include me?" From the outside, the Whitmore house looked like a postcard of the American dream: white walls, clean lawn, an American flag swaying gently in the wind. But behind those walls, fear had replaced love. Every smile was practiced, every answer rehearsed. Dinner ended the way it always did, with silence. Robert excused himself, turning on the news, and their mother cleared the table, her eyes tired but kind. One by one, the daughters slipped back into their rooms. Upstairs, Sophie opened her phone and saw a message. Made it home safe? It was from Ethan, the man her father must never know about. A mechanic, simple, kind, and nothing like the men her father introduced at military events. She smiled, but it faded quickly when she heard the colonel's footsteps in the hall. Downstairs, Diana sat by the sink, washing dishes long after they were clean. Mia scrolled through social media, liking posts about vacations she could never afford. Lila painted in secret under her desk lamp, sketching a girl trapped inside a golden frame. The clock struck 9. The colonel turned off the lights and walked upstairs, proud of his quiet, obedient home. He did not notice the tension that hung in the air like static before a storm. Voiceover. Every family has secrets. But when those secrets are built on fear, one truth can shatter everything. Outside, thunder rolled far in the distance. And inside the Whitmore house, the first crack had already begun. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the white curtains of the Whitmore house, painting soft gold on the kitchen tiles. But warmth did not live here anymore. The air was quiet, polite, heavy, like every word spoken had to pass inspection before it left someone's mouth. Diana poured coffee for her father. The smell filled the room, but he did not look up from his newspaper. "You should tell Tom to join us for dinner this week," he said. Diana's hands trembled slightly. Tom, her husband, had not been home for 3 days. "Yes, sir," she replied softly. "He has been busy." Robert nodded, proud of her answer. "Good. A man's commitment to his family is his honor." Upstairs, Sophie adjusted her military uniform in the mirror. Every crease had to be perfect. Her father's words echoed from childhood. "You are my soldier, Sophie. Never let your heart get in the way of duty." She repeated it silently like a prayer. Though her heart already belonged to Ethan, the mechanic who fixed her car 2 months ago, the man with dirt on his hands and gentleness in his eyes. When she thought of him, she smiled, but it was the kind of smile she could never show in this house. She tucked her phone into her pocket and whispered to her reflection, Just one more week until I can see him again. Mia stumbled down the stairs in oversized sunglasses and a cloud of perfume. Her phone kept buzzing with payment reminders. She swiped the notifications away and greeted her father with a practiced grin. "Good morning, Dad. You look sharp, as always." He gave her a brief nod. "Do something meaningful with your day, Mia. Life is not a party." "Of course, Dad," she said, her smile tight. The moment he turned away, she exhaled, whispering under her breath, "It has never been one for me." At the end of the table, Lila poked at her breakfast, drawing shapes on her napkin. Her sketch looked like a girl standing behind a glass wall. Robert noticed and frowned. "Law school starts in September. You are ready, I hope?" "Yes, sir," Lila lied, folding the napkin quickly. Her acceptance letter to the Art Institute of Chicago was hidden inside her dresser upstairs, unopened but memorized. She could still hear her mother's voice from last night, quiet but pleading. "Please, honey, not now. Your father has sacrificed too much for appearances. Give him this one thing." Lila had smiled and nodded, but inside, something fragile cracked. After breakfast, the house scattered. Diana drove to the hospital, Sophie to the base, Mia to a cafe, where she pretended to work remotely, and Lila back to her room, where canvases leaned against the walls like forbidden dreams. By afternoon, Diana's shift at the hospital was long and exhausting. She adjusted a patient's drip while her phone vibrated with a new message. "Tom, I will be staying at my brother's for a while. Please do not call." She stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Her throat burned, but she whispered, "Family above all," like a command she could no longer obey. Meanwhile, Sophie stood outside the garage downtown, her uniform crisp, her hair pinned back. Ethan looked up from under the hood of a car, wiping oil from his hands. His smile broke the wall she had built around herself. "Lieutenant Whitmore," he teased gently, "you look like you belong in another world." She laughed, nervous and soft. "Maybe I do." "Hi." They sat by the open bay door, drinking coffee from paper cups. The city hummed beyond them, ordinary and alive. For the first time, Sophie felt free. Ethan told her about his mother, about working since he was 16. She listened, fascinated. He never boasted, never judged. When she told him she grew up in a military family, he smiled. "That explains why you sit so straight," he said. "That explains why I am so tired," she replied. Back home, Robert returned from his morning walk to find the house quiet again. He passed the framed, quote, "Family above all," and paused. He thought it meant strength, but lately it felt like distance. Still, he straightened the frame with pride. To him, order meant love. Evening fell. Diana came home to an empty voicemail. Sophie's phone lit up with Ethan's name. Mia opened her laptop to see another overdue balance. Lila painted in the soft glow of her lamp, a small act of rebellion hidden inside art. From the outside, the Whitmores still looked perfect, but inside, each daughter carried a secret waiting to break free. And in a house built on fear of failure, one truth was about to cost them everything. A week later, the Whitmore house looked just as spotless as ever. The grass was cut short, the flag was ironed smooth, and every window gleamed. But the walls had started to listen. They heard the whispers behind closed doors, the sighs that came late at night, and the lies that held the family together. On the living room wall, the framed quote still hung in its place. "Family above all." It was not just decoration anymore. It had become a promise each daughter repeated in silence, even when it hurt. Diana passed by it every morning on her way to work. She always paused for half a second, touching the corner of the frame before leaving. It was her quiet ritual, a way to convince herself that pretending was a form of strength. But that morning, her hand dropped halfway. Her phone had just buzzed with a message from Tom. "We need to talk." Her breath caught, and for the first time she walked out without touching the frame. Sophie noticed it too when she came home from training. She stopped to stare at the words. "Family above all," she murmured. Her reflection in the glass looked sharper, colder, less like herself. She wondered, does this still include me if I love someone my father would never accept? Upstairs, Mia sat cross-legged on her bed, surrounded by unopened mail. She had spent the morning blocking collection calls, deleting overdue notices, pretending everything was under control. But when she glanced at the quote downstairs through the reflection in her mirror, she laughed bitterly. "Family above all," she whispered, "as long as we look rich enough to hide it." Yusa, Lila, sitting in her room, had started to draw that very frame in her sketchbook. But instead of writing the quote, She scribbled in bold black pencil, "Truth above fear." Then she tore the page out before anyone could see. That evening, the Whitmores gathered for dinner again. Roast beef, mashed potatoes, polite silence. Their mother, Grace, tried to lighten the mood. "Robert," she said softly, "maybe this weekend we can invite the girls' friends over. It has been a while." He shook his head. "Friends come and go. Family stays." Sophie swallowed hard, her fingers curling under the table. Across from her, Diana's phone lit up again. Tom's name flashed on the screen. She quickly turned it face down, her smile frozen. Robert looked at his daughters, proud and blind. "I raised strong women," he said. "Women who make me proud." No one answered. The sound of silverware against plates was all that filled the room. Later that night, the quiet broke. Sophie stood by the window, staring into the dark street. Her phone buzzed once more, Ethan's name again. She hesitated, then answered. "Hey," his voice said, calm and steady. "Just checking you got home safe." "I did," she replied. "Good. You sound tired." She sighed, lowering her voice. "You ever feel like your whole life is a performance?" Ethan chuckled softly. "Every day, but the trick is finding the one person you can be real with." Sophie smiled through the ache in her chest. "I think I've found him." At that same hour, Diana stood in the hospital parking lot, her car keys trembling in her hand. Tom was waiting by his car. His face was expressionless. "We are done, Diana," he said simply. "There is no point pretending anymore." She wanted to argue, to beg, but the words would not come. He drove away, leaving her in the hum of fluorescent lights. When she finally got back home, she did what she always did. She walked past the framed quote. This time she did not even look at it. Upstairs, Mia sat at her computer, searching for how to file bankruptcy quietly. She clicked through the links, her reflection pale in the screen. Lila painted until dawn, her fingers stained with blue and gold. On the canvas, she drew a girl breaking out of a picture frame. It was not just art anymore, it was a confession. The Whitmore house slept, but peace never came. Robert walked through the hallway before going to bed, straightening the picture frame one more time. He smiled faintly, believing it meant stability. But the glass was already loose. One small shake, and it would fall. Voiceover. Sometimes, the strongest walls are built from lies. But the moment a single truth slips through, everything begins to crack. And for the Whitmore family, that moment was coming sooner than they thought. Rain poured over Seattle that Friday night, heavy and unrelenting. The streets shimmered under the glow of streetlights, and thunder rolled somewhere far off. Sophie gripped the steering wheel of her black sedan, her knuckles white. She had just finished another long day at the base. Her uniform collar itched, her shoulders ached, and her father's last words still rang in her ears. Discipline makes the difference between honor and shame. But tonight she did not feel honorable. She just felt tired. As the rain thickened, her windshield wipers squealed, struggling to keep up. She turned onto the quiet road leading home, lined with pine trees and silence. That was when she heard the thud, the sharp hollow sound of her front tire blowing out. The car jerked violently to the right. She managed to pull over to the side, heart pounding, headlights cutting through the curtain of rain. "Perfect," she muttered, stepping out into the downpour. Cold drops hit her face and soaked through her uniform in seconds. She popped the trunk, shivering, staring at the spare tire like it was written in another language. Her father had always said she should know how to handle emergencies, but the army had never trained her for this. A pair of headlights appeared in the distance. A pickup truck slowed and stopped behind her. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a gray hoodie and work boots. His voice carried easily over the rain. "Flat tire." Sophie stiffened, instantly on guard. "I have got it handled, thank you." He smiled, just a quick, kind smile that somehow reached his eyes. "Sure you do, but you might ruin that uniform trying to lift the jack wrong." Before she could protest, he was already kneeling by the tire, his hands steady despite the rain. His movements were practiced, efficient. She crossed her arms, half annoyed, half relieved. "I did not ask for help," she said over the storm. He glanced up briefly. "Yeah, I noticed, but sometimes people help anyway." His name, she would learn later, was Ethan Cole. At that moment, he was just a stranger with soaked hair and grease-stained jeans, the kind of man her father would never invite into their world. Within minutes, he had the spare tire on. He stood up, wiping his hands on a rag from his pocket. "There," he said simply. "You are good to go." Note: Sophie opened her mouth to thank him, but the words caught. Her pride was louder than her gratitude. "You did not have to," she said instead. "I know," Ethan replied, stepping back toward his truck. "Have a safe drive, soldier." He was gone before she could respond, the red taillights fading into the rain. She stood there for a moment, the sound of water and thunder filling the silence. For reasons she could not explain, her chest ached. When she finally got home, her father was sitting in his armchair watching the evening news. He did not look up when she entered. "You are late," he said flatly. "There was a flat tire," she replied. He nodded once. "You should have checked the pressure before leaving the base. Be more careful next time." Sophie's hand tightened around her bag strap. "Someone helped me," she said quietly. Her father finally turned his head. "A soldier?" She hesitated. "No, a mechanic." His expression hardened. "Then you should have called roadside assistance. We do not rely on strangers." She wanted to argue, to tell him that kindness had saved her that night, not a rule or a rank, but she just nodded. "Yes, sir." Later, in her room, she changed into dry clothes and sat by the window. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, tapping softly against the glass. She replayed the moment in her head, the way Ethan had smiled, the calm in his voice, the quiet decency of it. For the first time in years, someone had helped her without expecting perfection in return. Downstairs, the framed quote still hung on the wall. "Family above all." But that night, another thought crept quietly into her mind, one her father would never understand. Voiceover. Sometimes, it takes a stranger to remind you that love is not weakness. It is the courage to be seen as you really are. Outside, the storm passed. But inside the Whitmore house, a new kind of weather had begun to form, something small, soft, and unstoppable. The morning after the storm, Seattle looked washed clean, but inside the Whitmore house the tension had not lifted. The smell of coffee and toast filled the kitchen, but no one spoke much. Robert sat at the head of the table, scanning the newspaper, while the rest of the family performed their daily ritual of silence. Diana's eyes were heavy from another sleepless night. Tom had not called since their fight, and his side of the bed was still cold. She stirred her coffee without drinking it. Sophie sat across from her, her uniform crisp as always, but her mind was somewhere else, on a stranger who had fixed her tire in the rain and then disappeared without asking for anything in return. Mia scrolled through her phone, pretending to read messages, trying to ignore the email that screamed final notice. And Lila stared at her untouched plate, thinking of the acceptance letter hidden in her drawer. "Eyes up, girls," Robert said without looking up from his paper. "A Whitmore faces the day. She does not hide from it." They all straightened instantly, as if pulled by invisible strings. Later that day, Sophie was assigned to assist in a public safety event at a local community center. Rows of military trucks lined the parking lot, and uniformed officers greeted visitors. The air smelled of hot dogs and rain-soaked asphalt. When she stepped out of her Jeep, the first thing she saw made her heart stop. Ethan. He was there, setting up a small auto maintenance booth for a local outreach program. His gray hoodie was replaced by a dark blue work shirt, his name embroidered in white thread over the pocket. He looked up just as she froze, recognition flashing between them. "Well, look who decided to visit my world," he said with a grin. Sophie tried to sound composed. "This is my duty station, not a visit." "Then I guess fate has a sense of humor," Ethan said, handing a wrench to a volunteer. "You here to inspect the troops?" She smiled before she could stop herself. Something like that. Throughout the event, she caught glimpses of him working, teaching a teenager how to change oil, laughing easily with people, moving with confidence and kindness. He was nothing like the rigid men she had grown up around. Every time their eyes met, something in her softened. But that moment of quiet connection did not go unnoticed. Robert arrived later to oversee the event. He was in uniform, sharp and commanding. When he spotted Sophie talking to Ethan near the maintenance booth, his jaw tightened. He walked straight toward them. "Lieutenant Whitmore," he said, voice like a blade. "A word." Sophie turned, her posture snapping to attention. "Yes, sir." Robert's gaze flicked to Ethan. "You can return to your work, son." Ethan nodded politely but did not move far. "Yes, sir." When they were alone, Robert's tone dropped lower. "You will remember who you are and what your name represents." "I do, sir," Sophie replied, trying to stay calm. "Then explain why you are associating with a mechanic during duty hours." Sophie's throat tightened. "He volunteered for the program. He is helping." Robert's stare hardened. "Helping is for people who have nothing else to offer. You are a Whitmore, do not forget that. She could feel her pulse in her ears. He helped me once, sir. I am just returning the respect. Respect? Robert scoffed. You think kindness erases class? The words cut deeper than he realized. Sophie's chest rose and fell, but she held her voice steady. I think it proves character. For a moment, silence hung heavy between them. Robert finally turned away, shaking his head. Discipline first, feelings later. Oh, Co. That night, Sophie sat on her bed staring at her phone. Ethan had texted once. You okay? She wanted to answer, but she could still hear her father's voice, sharp, final. She typed and deleted a dozen times before leaving it blank. Downstairs, Robert walked past the framed quote, "Again family above all." He straightened it like he always did, unaware that the smallest crack had appeared in the glass. Thin but spreading. Voiceover. When pride becomes a shield, love is mistaken for rebellion. And rebellion, for the Whitmores, was about to begin. Outside, the city lights flickered against the dark sky, reflecting in the broken glass of that frame a warning the Colonel never saw. Sunday came heavy with silence. The air inside the Whitmore house felt tighter than usual, like the walls themselves knew something was about to give. The long dining table was set, the candles were lit, and the family gathered as always. But this dinner would not end like the others. Robert sat at the head of the table, his posture perfect, his voice steady. Before we eat, I want to remind everyone of what this family stands for. Honor, discipline, respect. These are not just words, they are our legacy. Grace, his wife, glanced at her daughters nervously. She could feel the tremor running under the surface, the one everyone was trying to hide. Diana was the first to break. Her phone buzzed again with another message from Tom. Her eyes filled before she could stop it. She set the phone down, hands shaking. Dad, I need to tell you something. Robert frowned. Can it not wait until after dinner? No, she said, her voice cracking. Tom is leaving me. He has been gone for a week. Forks froze mid-air. Robert's face hardened. And why is this being discussed at my table? Because I cannot pretend anymore, Diana whispered. I am tired of acting like everything is perfect. Robert's jaw clenched. Marriage takes discipline, not emotion. Fix it. I cannot fix something that is already broken, she said softly. The silence that followed was shattered by Sophie's voice. She is right, Dad. Not everything can be fixed by control. He turned to her sharply. And what would you know about that? Her eyes met his, steady and unflinching. I know that love does not need your approval to exist. His expression darkened. Are you speaking of that mechanic again? Yes, he said. His name is Ethan, and he is the first person who has treated me like more than a rank or a last name. Robert pushed his chair back, his voice rising. You are embarrassing yourself. You will end this nonsense immediately. I will not, Sophie said. Not this time. Grace reached out, her hand trembling. Please, both of you. But the room was already spinning with tension. Then came Mia. Her laughter, usually bright, broke through with a hollow sound. You want embarrassment? Try this. She pulled a letter from her purse and threw it onto the table. Final debt notice. Congratulations, Dad. Your perfect daughter is bankrupt. Robert stared at her in disbelief. What on earth have you done? I tried to live up to your expectations, Mia snapped. The clothes, the image, the lies, it costs more than I could pay. Grace covered her mouth, tears filling her eyes. And then, in the smallest voice, Lila spoke. I got into the Art Institute of Chicago. Robert blinked, confused. What did you say? I got in, she said again, louder this time. Not law school, art. That is what I want, Dad. That is who I am. The room went still. Robert's hand tightened around his glass. It cracked under the pressure. Enough, he said. His voice was low, controlled, dangerous. You have all forgotten what it means to be Whitmores. You have disrespected everything I built. Sophie stood. What you built was fear. Watch your tone, he snapped. No, she said, her voice rising. For once, you will listen. You taught us to be perfect, but you never taught us to be happy. Robert slammed his fist on the table. The glass shattered, water spilling across the white tablecloth. Get out, he said. All of you. Grace gasped. Robert. Please. Out, he roared. The daughters hesitated only for a moment. One by one, they rose. Diana walked out first, holding back tears. Mia followed, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Lila clutched her sketchbook, and Sophie looked at her father one last time. "I hope one day you realize that family is not obedience," she said quietly. "It is love." The front door closed behind them, leaving Robert standing alone at the head of the table. The candles flickered, their flames struggling for air. On the wall, the framed, quote, "Family above all" hung crooked. The glass finally split down the middle. Voiceover. Sometimes the truth does not destroy a family. It only shows what was already broken. Outside, the night wind carried the sound of rain against the roof, soft, relentless, and merciful. Inside, the Colonel's house finally fell silent. The next morning, the Whitmore house was quiet. The rain had stopped, leaving the street washed and still. Robert sat alone at the breakfast table, his coffee untouched, the silence echoing through the empty chairs. The house, once full of voices, now sounded like a museum, cold, spotless, lifeless. He looked up at the framed quote on the wall, "Family above all." The crack in the glass had grown overnight, spreading like a spider's web. He straightened the frame, but it no longer sat level. No matter how he adjusted it, it still leaned to one side. For the first time, he noticed how heavy silence could feel. Across town, the sisters gathered in a small two-bedroom apartment above a coffee shop. It smelled like paint, takeout food, and freedom. Diana sat at the kitchen table, staring at the lease papers. "It is not much," she said, "but it is ours." Mia laughed softly. "Ours and completely unfurnished." She pointed at the single couch and the mismatched chairs they had picked up from a thrift store. "Luxury living, Whitmore style." Sophie smiled, unpacking a box of mugs. "After everything that happened, this feels better than perfect." Lila leaned against the wall, sketchbook in hand. "I cannot believe we actually left," she said. "Dad probably thinks we will come crawling back by the weekend." Diana shook her head. "Not this time." She looked around at her sisters, each tired, each brave in her own quiet way. "We have spent our whole lives trying to be what he wanted. Maybe it is time we figure out what we want." Days turned into weeks. They found a rhythm, rough but real. Diana took extra shifts at the hospital, her patients calling her the calm nurse with the sad eyes. Sophie visited Ethan's garage, helping organize events for veterans. She wore jeans instead of her uniform and learned how to fix a tire herself. Ethan would tease her. "Guess the soldier can take orders after all." She would smile. "Only from someone who listens." Mia got a job at a local bookstore, where she recorded a small podcast about starting over. "It is called The Honest Debt," she said proudly, "because pretending has interest rates too." And Lila painted on the apartment walls, bright colors spilling across the plaster. She was finally free to create without hiding. At night, they would eat together on the floor, instant noodles, laughter, and music from someone's old phone speaker. It was messy. It was beautiful. Voiceover. For the first time, they were not daughters living under a title. They were women, learning to breathe without permission. Meanwhile, Robert still kept the house in perfect order. He walked past 4 empty bedrooms every night, convincing himself they would return. But the echo in the halls reminded him that control had never been the same as love. One evening, as he set his coffee cup down, he saw something small on the floor, a piece of glass from the broken frame. He picked it up carefully, staring at his reflection in it. The quote above him still read "Family above all." But now, the words felt less like a command and more like a question. For the first time, Robert Whitmore was not sure he had the answer. Months passed. Spring came early to Seattle that year, washing the city in soft light and cherry blossoms. The Whitmore sisters had learned how to live without fear. The apartment was still small and cluttered, but it felt alive. Their laughter echoed against the walls that once heard only silence. Sophie's life had changed the most. She no longer wore her uniform outside the base, unless duty required it. With Ethan, she had discovered something steady and simple, conversations that mattered, moments that did not need perfection. They spent weekends helping at the community garage, teaching single mothers how to maintain their cars. Every act of kindness reminded her of that rainy night when he had stopped to help her without expecting anything in return. One afternoon, as they finished a workshop, a photographer approached them. "Lieutenant Whitmore," she said, "mind if I get a picture for the local paper, you and your volunteer team?" Sophie hesitated, then smiled. "Sure." She stood beside Ethan, grease on her hands, sunlight on her face. For the first time, she did not hide who she was. That photo spread faster than she expected. Within a week, It appeared online army officer volunteers with local mechanic to help the community. Compliments flooded the comment section, but so did judgment. At home, Robert saw the article on his computer screen. His chest tightened as he scrolled through the comments. Unprofessional, a disgrace to the uniform. The colonel's daughter, dating a mechanic? His pride turned to fury. He felt the old instinct rise: control, command, correct. But beneath that anger was something colder. Fear. Fear of losing the image he had built his life upon. The next day, Sophie received a formal notice from her superior officer. A review board would question her about inappropriate public conduct. Her hands shook as she read it. When Ethan heard, he offered to step back. "I do not want to cost you your career." She looked at him, eyes full of exhaustion and love. "If love costs me everything, then maybe it is the only thing worth paying for." Word reached Robert quickly. He attended the hearing uninvited. The room was filled with officers in crisp uniforms, reporters waiting outside. Sophie stood before the board, explaining that her volunteer work had nothing to do with disrespect. Still, whispers spread. The air was heavy with judgment. The door at the back opened. Robert walked in, not in uniform, but in a simple gray suit. The room went still. He stepped beside his daughter, his voice clear. "If anyone here believes that helping others is dishonor, then I taught my daughters wrong." A long silence followed. Then one of the officers stood and saluted. "Sir, I think you taught them exactly right." For the first time in years, Sophie saw her father not as a commander, but as a man flawed, proud, and finally human. That night, when the hearing ended, Robert walked outside with her. The streetlights flickered softly. The air smelled of rain again. He looked at her and said quietly, "I was wrong. I thought protecting our name was love, but love does not need a name." Voiceover. In the end, redemption does not come with medals or rank. It comes when pride bows to love. And for Robert Whitmore, that was the moment he finally saluted his daughter, not as a soldier, but as himself. Summer settled over Seattle, soft and golden. The Whitmore sisters no longer lived under the same roof, but their hearts had finally found the same rhythm. What had once been a family built on duty had turned into a family built on choice. Sophie and Ethan's small backyard wedding took place on a warm Saturday afternoon. There were no uniforms, no speeches about honor, only friends, laughter, and the sound of wind through the trees. Diana stood by her sister's side, holding the bouquet. Mia filmed the ceremony on her phone, while Lila painted the scene in watercolor at a small table in the corner. Robert sat in the front row, hands folded, wearing no medals and no pride, only humility. When Sophie and Ethan exchanged vows, he blinked hard to hold back tears. Grace, sitting beside him, smiled softly. "You did good, Robert," she whispered. After the ceremony, the guests moved to the backyard where strings of lights hung between trees. Sophie found her father standing near the porch, watching everyone. She walked over, still in her wedding dress, her voice gentle. "You came." He smiled faintly. "You thought I would not?" "I did not know if you could," she said. Robert exhaled. "I almost did not. I was afraid I would not recognize myself here." She looked up at him. "You did not lose yourself, Dad. You just finally found the part you hid from us." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Robert placed his hand on her shoulder. "I am proud of you, Sophie, not because you followed my rules, but because you found your own." Later, when the sun began to set, all four sisters gathered with their father for a photo. It was not formal. They stood barefoot in the grass, arms around one another, laughing as the photographer counted down. The picture caught them mid-laughter, four women who had fought their way back to love, and a father learning to belong again. Weeks passed. Diana opened a small clinic for veterans and single mothers, using her own savings to start it. Mia's podcast, The Honest Debt, began gaining followers, her voice becoming a source of comfort for people learning to forgive themselves. Lila received her first art scholarship, her mural The Four Lies painted across a community wall, showing four silhouettes stepping out of a golden frame. And Robert sold the old house. When the new owners came, he removed the cracked frame from the wall. He held it for a long moment, staring at the words, "Family above all." Then he gently replaced the phrase inside with a handwritten note, "Love above fear." He smiled as he hung it in his new apartment. On Sunday, the family gathered again for dinner, this time in Sophie and Ethan's backyard. No uniforms, no rehearsed blessings, just conversation, real and warm. As they ate, Robert raised his glass. "To family," he said. Then after a pause, he added quietly, "To the love that crosses every line." Voiceover. The Whitmores began with one lie that perfection could replace love. But in the end, it was love that saved them. Because sometimes, the greatest rescue of all is finding your way home. And as the camera would have pulled back, the lights flickered like fireflies, and laughter filled the night of